You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. Really excited for our guest today. From my experience as a therapist, as I've shared before, I've done this for, over 20 years. One of the most emotionally charged, one of the most, I don't want to say important because I don't want to rank order, but when we have families and clients that come through that are wanting to help a child or wanting to help an adolescent, sometimes it can just really feel like the stakes are a little higher. Most of the feedback and most of the questions that we get and asking for tips and asking for advice apply to that realm of how do I help my child with blank? Or I've got a teenager that I'm struggling with. How can I best help them? So we have an absolute expert on today that's going to help us with some of those answers and help us deal with, some of those questions, and also to talk about what it's like to do this work from our side of the table, and to offer some tips and some techniques to help both parties get the most out of that time. So Dr. Shivana Naidoo is with us today. She is a double board certified psychiatrist. She does specialize in children, adolescents, but she sees adults. She is a New Yorker at heart, which is great because I'm on the East Coast, so we're going to connect on that. But she works and lives in Arizona now with her family. She's also the founder of DoBetterMD, which is a wonderful organization. It really aims to help people prevent mental health crises and prevent, promote mental wellness in youth. And we talk about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So Dr. Naidoo is really at the forefront of getting out on the front of that and helping people before the crisis happens, which is really great. And it's the most amazing thing ever because I have an hour with a psychiatrist, which is a really hard thing to get nowadays. So I'm excited for this time. I'm really pumped and welcome, Dr. Naidoo. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
And I do want to comment again, we talked a little bit before we shot, but the colors are great. I'm feeling calm. We've got the blue theme going. So, and you've got a wonderful smile. So we're all feeling very comfortable and glad to be here. So how's life in Arizona? Let's start there.
It's a little hot nowadays, but the breathing is easier, I think, than on the East Coast. So I've heard, unfortunately. So I think the heat is up all over. And I think that climate change is really affecting people on multiple levels. It's affecting mental health and medical health. And I think here in Arizona, we've been dealing with the heat for a long time. And I find a lot of people will come here, the snowbirds that are kind of tired with the winter will come down here. And I do feel that having lived on the East Coast and in Albany, upstate New York before, and in Arizona back and forth throughout the past couple of years, the sun has a huge impact on my mood and mental health. So I'm thankful that I live in a place with blue skies most of the year and good weather most of the year.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Texas, right? So not quite Arizona, but we certainly had, our string of 30 to 40 triple digit days in a row and that kind of stuff. And very naively, I was moving down from Ohio and I had like an old SUV. I think it was like a Ford Explorer with no AC. And I just took off to college and I learned really quickly that was not going to work in the South. But point well taken about vitamin D and the sun and the energy levels, because when my family moved to New England, that first winter, all the jokes about seasonal affective disorder and the winter blues, it was real. You felt and functioned completely different. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah, and I think I experienced some of that myself because I grew up in New York City and then spent most of my training, my adult training, child training in New York City and Long Island. And then I moved to Arizona for my first job, and I really took it for granted, the sun and the weather. And then after that, moved to Albany in upstate New York, which has lots of great greenery, but the sky is kind of gray. And that really impacted my sense of hope and possibility. And I think did affect a lot of people there as well. So, where we live greatly affects us. Who we live with greatly affects us.
Sure.
So we have to make our environments as supportive as possible in whatever way we can. So we kind of decided to move back here because it was good for our environment.
And you've got a great Instagram feed and social media presence we'll talk about as well, because you're an experienced podcaster yourself. You have your own podcast. But perusing through your feed, I see that you get out. You spend time in nature. Like there's a lot of, greenery and scenery in your feed. And it looks like you're kind of always on the go and enjoying that. Is that just an intentional kind of mental health strategy? Just what you naturally like to do? Like what's the goal there?
That's so interesting. I really enjoy morning meditative walks. I find the process of walking so powerful. I actually advise to all of my patients, if you can get in a 5-minute walk every day, like yes, for cardiovascular benefits, you want 30 minutes of cardiovascular 5 times a week, but just 5 minutes of walking, the feeling of moving forward, the feeling of stepping forward is so powerful. So I really enjoy quiet morning walks before anyone has woken up. I love getting up really early and feeling like, I have 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5-minute walk and feel like I've started my day and just kind of center myself and have my intentions and just soak up the sun as it's rising. I feel like having that personal relationship with myself and with the universe and the world and filling my heart with gratitude for the opportunity to have another day and see another sunrise. I think that sets my day off right. So that's where those pictures really come from, because we also are blessed in Arizona to have great sunrises and sunsets and be able to see it, because we don't have as much city out here. So yes, that's where that comes from. But I think a lot of people find presence of mind when they are able to take in the sounds of nature and receive positive input.
Yeah, and that feeling of connection, being connected to something larger than yourself, and issues like grounding, and there are other physical benefits and things like that. But I think you nailed it. Just that sense of I'm part of something here, and I'm beginning my day with intention. Right? I said I was going to go outside, see the sunrise, and I did. And check, that's the first thing off. And I've done it on purpose, and it nourishes the spirit and the body. And so it's a great way to start. So just as kind of a 101, I mean, we have a lot of different providers on our show, and, a double board certified psychiatrist. So can you talk a little bit about, this is going to be really basic, but just sort of in behavioral health world where psychiatry fits in the equation versus psychology versus therapy, like what is a double board certified psychiatrist and how do you help?
Great question. So a lot of my podcast is for that same reason, because I think it's kind of confusing because we all kind of look the same and sound the same and say the same thing. So I think from the patient-client perspective, it's kind of hard to tell apart who we are and how we fit in to the whole system. So a psychiatrist in general is a medical doctor. That means we went to medical school. So I went to undergrad for 4 years. I went to medical school for 4 years. And then after medical school, I did residency training, which is specialized training in adult psychiatry, and then got a board certification with that, and then did child psychiatry, which is another couple of years. So I did 3 years of adult, and then I did 2 years of child, and then you take all these huge exams, right, to pass to be board certified, which means that the board recognizes you to practice medicine in these particular fields. So there are medical doctors, MDs and DOs, doctors of osteopathic medicine, which can prescribe medication and are at the doctorate level. But there are also other people who are called prescribers or providers that can do similar things, which are nurse practitioners and physician assistants, but they have different types of training than we do. So as a doctor and as a board certified child and adult psychiatrist, I'm kind of at the highest level of training for being able to provide that. And of course, you can have additional trainings and certificates. I have an additional training and certificate in integrative psychiatry, which is thinking about the body, mind, spirit as connected to mental health, as well as nutritional psychiatry, which is considering what you eat and supplements as also a factor of improving your mental health. So that's kind of on the functional medicine side of things. But many different psychiatrists specialize in different types of diagnoses and training. And really our goal in the wheelhouse of mental health is to provide an accurate diagnosis, which is a cluster of symptoms, to help other professionals discuss and understand those cluster of symptoms. I'm saying that specifically because it's not meant to label patients. It's not meant to pigeonhole patients. It's really meant to help other providers in this very large system more accurately and effectively communicate, as well as medications if and when necessary. So we also do are experts in prescribing medications, understanding how medications affect your physical health, mental health, and side effects. So that's kind of where we fit in.
I love it. I love where you went with that right off the bat, where talking about this is almost shorthand for the field of behavioral health to help work with you, not a label of you inside out, right? Because as a therapist, I work with folks before and after they've seen folks like you, right? And I think there's something going on. We go to see Dr. Naidoo. Dr. Naidoo confirms the diagnosis or provides an alternative diagnosis, and they come back. And I see one of two things happen. I see one where it's like relief, where it's like, oh, good. I now have an idea. There's a pathway forward. We can kind of target our interventions, and this is a good thing. I see the other side, which I don't want to label as bad, but where it almost becomes part of the identity, right? Where it's like, I am borderline. And so I'm an ADD or an ADHD person, and it becomes like who they are. So you feel a little differently. It's not an identification of them personally, but more, like you said, about that cluster of symptoms and what we can do about it.
And I think, because I'm mainly a child and adolescent psychiatrist, the identity of a person is really important to me, right? Because I want a young person to continue to know they are evolving. And yeah, when we're adults, we're evolving too. But I think particularly when you're a young adult and you're trying to describe who I am, I'm very careful because I don't want young people to say, I am this diagnosis, and therefore I can only do XYZ things, or XYZ things are difficult. Like I am an anxious person. I have anxiety, so I can't go out. But I do think there's power with acknowledging, which I think the younger generation has done so much better than ours and older, is acknowledging that they have challenges and then wanting to work on them. And so it's taking the step from acknowledging to awareness and then really working on that issue so that you can be empowered by the knowledge of that weakness, and it's not a limitation, that it really can be an understanding of self. So, on my website, I talk about something called the Cactus Kid, and it's a description for parents to understand how someone suffering from depression or anxiety or any mental health condition is, which is, I think every child is like a rose. You're born, you have limitless capacity, you're fragrant, you have a couple thorns here and there, but really your goal is to really unfold into the universe. But life and environments happen internally and externally, and then we can develop into a cactus kid, which is like developing prickles. And when you develop prickles and thorns, it's hard to hug a cactus. It's hard to be around a cactus. And I think sometimes parents don't know how to handle when their child has kind of morphed into a cactus, and they might not even realize it until it's a full-blown cactus, and it's really hard to engage with that young person. So I think our job as mental health care professionals, whether you're a psychiatrist or a therapist or a counselor or a case manager, really is to figure out how to re-nourish this cactus kid and get them to evolve into another kind of flourishing plant. It may not be a rose, but how can we help them be less prickly? Because when you hurt on the inside, you're going to hurt others on the outside. It's really hard to be kind and hopeful and optimistic when you feel depressed and angry and hopeless. So I think that educating parents that your perspective really does change when you're depressed, when you're experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety, experiencing mood swings. So we can't have the same expectations as another young person who is not feeling those things. And at the same time, the challenge is we have to get you closer to that. We still have to try. It's really, really challenging when you have someone that is so deeply down there that, they're unwilling. It's very hard.
It's such a great Arizona metaphor, right? Like the cactus.
Right.
It's like, but they bloom as well, right? Like they can, under the right conditions, bloom as well. And
absolutely,
from the movies, they can provide nourishment and they can contribute. So, I'm old enough that when I got home from school, I watched like G.I. Joe and stuff like that, right? And they would always say, "Knowing is half the battle," right? And that was always their message, don't swim too soon after eating. You'll get cramps and you'll die. Knowing is half the battle, right? And so I think that's how it is for identity. I love that you're talking about that and how to use that identity, not as a limitation, but as sort of a foundation and a launch for what is possible. Because I think for people, identity is half the battle. I think if they label themselves as flawed and broken, they will go out into the world and prove themselves correct over and over and over again. And the inverse is true too. If they label themselves as capable, or like you said with adolescents, not in a fixed state, I'm developing, I'm dealing with depression right now, but I'm not depressed, because that's a fixed statement. Then anything becomes possible, right? And so they can go out and they can use that as a foundation and not a limitation. So I love that. So you had talked about with parents too. So I would imagine working with children and adolescents, a lot of your work is around educating the parents and the support system as well. Can you talk a little bit about, what's required there and, how your work connects not only to the client, but to the larger family system?
Yeah, I think that it's very different for families to see a therapist or a counselor than to see a psychiatrist. I think there still is some stigma about seeing a shrink and some sense that seeing a doctor like me will be a really unpleasant experience. So I think that, my take on providing care is not just to provide, well, this is what you should do. I think that's really not it at all. It's really, these are the options that I see for you to choose from. This is the perspective I have about what's happening for your child. But my perspective is not the be all end all. Your perspective, parent, is important. Your teen's perspective is important. The teacher's perspective is important. And we have to integrate all of that. And I also acknowledge another psychiatrist may think about this differently. But the most important person is you as the parent working with your teen as the patient and sorting out who resonates with you, who makes the most sense with you, who can you work with. So I feel that I kind of dispel the darkness a lot. I think that cloudiness of misinformation and what's really real, I think that I really try to have my patients and parents feel that the light is kind of coming through the curtains and they're able to see a little bit more clearly. And really, it's not seeing what's there, it's seeing themselves. How does the parent see themselves as an agent of change and empowerment in their child's life? How do they see themselves as being empowered to make a difference to keep their child safe? How does that teen see themselves as making a choice to take a medication, making a choice to get up in the morning and do their 5-minute walk, making a choice to be receptive to what their parent is saying versus just shutting them out because they don't know anything because I'm right here. Just
Right.
how can we be more receptive to each other and the information that's coming at us and not be threatened by it?
That's a great point, because I think that going to see any doctor can be a very threatening and scary experience for anybody. Anybody. As we get older, it's funny. Our experience with the doctor changes. When you're young and you're healthy, they kind of like barely look up and like, and then they're like, hey, you get older, and they're like, we got some stuff to talk about, right? And so just that, what it could be. So I think about that, especially in the context of a child, and especially in the context of psychiatry, because mental health, I mean, even though we're talking about this more, that stigma does exist, right? And if I've made my way to the psychiatrist, does this mean I'm crazy? Does this mean, and you seem to view it as more of a collaborative educational experience where you say you're laying out options, where I think sometimes people walk in there and they say, this doctor is going to fix me. They're going to have all the answers. They're going to spend X amount of minutes with me, and I'll get my answer. So how do you overcome that? How do you soften that to a collaborative place? And what does it actually look like? If I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to have a collaborative experience with you, like, how's that actually going to look versus sort of sitting there scared and waiting for you to tell me what's wrong with me? Like, how does that process work?
I do think the first aspect comes from us as the I'm going to say psychiatrist. I feel like I have to say provider to include everybody, but if I'm talking about psychiatrists, I'm going to say psychiatrist. So as a psychiatrist, it comes first from us. We have to create a space to let that, I'm going to say patient or client, that patient know that they are listened to, that they are heard, that they are seen, and that their experience is valued. That whatever their experience and thoughts are important, and that I'm not going to contradict it or say, no, you don't have this, or no, you don't have that symptom. No, it is your life experience, and we need to meet you where you're at and help you gain an understanding of that first. So the first thing is for me to hear them. The second thing is for me to respect them. And I think there's something called the therapeutic alliance. I'm sure you've talked about this before, which is that aspect of being heard, being seen, is incredibly therapeutic. And that's why I think so many people need and benefit from therapy, because their opinions, their thoughts, their experience, their inner world is being witnessed by somebody else and held and not judged and accepted for what it is. I think that itself is so important. And that experience is different for the parent and different for the teen or adolescent. So I think the other thing is creating a space that the extra challenge for a child psychiatrist is being able to do that for both. And sometimes we're not successful with doing it for both. And really, because the patient is the child, we have to have the child first. When I'm in that experience of being a child psychiatrist, I have to have that take over and be more important than the parent. But the parent is the one who consents or agrees legally for treatment. So you still have to get buy-in from the parent. But I do that by separating the parent and child when I do my assessment. So for me, and as an outpatient psychiatrist, I have a clear assessment and then start treatment. But first, you need to do an assessment, which means you don't just jump forward with medications and jump forward with, you need to do A, B, C, D, E. No, I have to hear you out, get an understanding of what's happening. And that may take some time. And I think, unfortunately, in managed care, where we don't have much time, it is hard to do that assessment. But we continue to assess even once we start treatment. But part of that assessment process is building that alliance and seeing, does this kid want to work with me? Does this teen want to work with me? Does this parent want to work with me? And there have been times where it's a clear yes, and other times where it's a clear no, and we don't go forward with treatment. But some of the times we're in between and we're still feeling each other out for a little bit. And that's okay. Because even if they decide not to go forward with me, if they can have an experience with me where they feel seen, heard, respected, and possible, if I'm not a good fit for you, there might be someone else out there who will. Versus so many times where they have a negative experience with a psychiatrist and patients say, forget that. I'm never going back to a psychiatrist again. I don't want to see them. All they want to do is drug me up. No, like that's the last thing I want people to feel when they work with me, that the only answer, the only thing to do is drugs. That is not the case. It can be helpful in some cases, but it's a journey. Even taking a medication, that is a whole journey in and of itself. And that whole process can be therapeutic as well, because there's no guarantee whether you start a medication I recommend or a supplement I recommend, or even engage with me in therapy, which psychiatrists also have training in therapy as well. So back in the day, a lot of psychiatrists would do therapy, and even now some do. But again, I think managed care has pushed us in a direction where we're not profitable to do therapy, so we're doing medication instead. But I think that therapeutic bent is also a part of that process, to have what we say and how we listen be a therapeutic intervention, even if it's not overt therapy.
When we talk about managed care, it all kind of rolls together. You're talking about some really ambitious goals in how long, how much time? I mean, how often do you just in nuts and bolts, like how many minutes do you typically get with a client?
So it's a great question. So, for adults, typically it's 15 minutes. We have 15 minutes with an adult allotted for most places. And if you're in a great place, you have 20 minutes allotted for an adult for a follow-up visit. Usually initial visits for an adult will be maybe between 40 minutes to an hour. And then for child, we typically will get 60 minutes for a child visit for an initial assessment or evaluation. And then if we're lucky, we get 20 minutes. If it's a really tough case, I will advocate for a 40-minute. But it's really hard to get a very challenging case in and out of your door in 20 minutes. And I think the other thing is, now that we have telehealth, the combination of in-person mixed in with telehealth visits, that has made it even harder, because in-person visits are almost always a couple minutes late, and telehealth people are always on time. So if you're just seeing in person, you have some leeway because everybody's a little bit late. But if you're mixing them together, it makes it much more challenging to kind of keep the flow on time. Because with mental health, unlike your primary care doctor or GYN, where you go in and you expect to wait for like an hour and a half to see the doctor, here, no, you go in, you're expected to go in and be seen within that time slot for therapy or for medication. It's a different expectation, I think, on the patient end too.
Yeah. Well, and as a therapist, I find myself so many times at the end of the hour going, I can't believe we're done already. Like, I just feel like we have so much more. And now I put myself in your shoes and think about at the end of 15 to 20 minutes, having that feeling. So gosh, that's tough. That's really, really tough. So I know you have your initial and you've got 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and then, 15 to 20 minutes on a follow-up if everybody's in their chair at the right time, and you're doing this 24 hours a day and you're making medical diagnoses, you're making medical decisions, right? I mean, because these are I don't want to rank order medications, but they're serious medications. I mean, they can affect the body and they can affect the brain in some very serious ways. Oh, by the way, we're talking kids and adolescents, right? So I'm not asking you to go through the DSM or do a differential in front of us, but how do you make that call in such a tight window? Like, what are the keys? What are the things that you're looking for? They're like, yes, we need to move forward with medication here, or whoa, we need to take some time. Like, what is that line, if there even is a line? Like, how do you make a choice like that in 10 minutes,
So it is really, really challenging. And I think that's why for me, that assessment is really important because when we do an assessment, which is the first visit, which is the clean slate, right? I don't have any, whatever preconceived notions I have from the screening is going to be very different than that first visit. And then as psychiatrists, we're trained in something called a formulation. And a formulation means what is not a diagnosis, not a medication. What is the grand scheme of what's happening? How do we formulate how this person came to be who they are, how they came to have the problems they do, and how does that set the frame or the structure of understanding for the challenges going forward? So once you have a formulation of someone, which continues to evolve as we get to know the person, that helps inform us in terms of moving forward. So for example, if I have a young person, a teenager, they're 17 years old, and in my assessment, I realize this person likely has ADHD, which means their mind is going in 17 different directions at the same time. But they also have some concrete thinking. Maybe they don't have a full IQ scale. Maybe they're borderline intellectual functioning, or you're realizing although they have ADHD and they have kind of many different thoughts at the same time, they may not be able to process it very well. So that formulation of my initial assessment helps me in my 15-minute visit know, okay, I have to break things down for this person. I have to repeat it a couple times for this person. I have to get the parent to rephrase what I just said because the teen may not understand. So then from that formulation, I know how can I be effective in my 15-minute visit. So before I go in to see any patient who's established, I always go back to my last note. I review it. I have a snippet of what I was thinking. And for me, I know all psychiatrist doctors don't do this, but I always have my plans, quote unquote, air quotes, like my option plans on that paper. So I know, okay, I was thinking this med, this med, this med. I was thinking that therapy. Those are my thoughts. So when I go in and I hear what's going on now in this 15 minutes, I can decide between those 5 options that I thought of. Okay, now I think this one's rising to the top. Let's talk about this one more. But it is really challenging. And I think going back to your question about how do you decide medication or not, with young people, I really prefer no meds, right? I really prefer no medication at all. But to me, if a young person has attempted suicide, if they've tried to end their life, that to me is we need to try meds because it takes so much mentally to jump over so many mental hoops to actually try. If you've gotten to that point, whether or not you have impulsivity, whether or not you've been thinking about it for 4 years, that to me is really worrisome that you're in a position where you want to no longer be alive. And as a psychiatrist, that's the one thing I can't let happen, right? Like I don't want anyone to kill themselves. That's my goal. So that is really where if I have a young person who has said that to me, even if I see them for initial assessment and they tried a year ago, 2 years ago, it makes me really, really want to treat the depression or anxiety or whatever mental health condition could be aggravating their risk of attempting again. And for those who've attempted suicide, it's a 60% chance they'll try again in that year. 60%. So oftentimes parents don't know, right? Something else happens in school, for example, and they find out. But if that young person has tried, it's very likely they'll try again, or with the right or wrong amount of stress, environmental factors, internal distress, that can tip the scale again to try again. So we really want to do whatever we can to help improve their resilience, to tolerate stress, their skills to cope. And if there is an underlying mental health condition that needs to be treated, we treat it because I don't want that kid in a position where they'll try again.
And that's a scary statistic, but if you think about it, what I believe to be logically, it makes all the sense in the world because if somebody has made an attempt, there's an underlying vulnerability, there's an unresolved issue, right? There are contributing factors. Okay, so emergency services, parents, therapists, we intervene, we stabilize the child. it doesn't mean any of those underlying issues have been dealt with. It just means we kept them safe for that day, right? And so that's where you have to dig back in and do that work. And that work is a long process. So they're carrying those vulnerabilities forward with them. And it makes all the sense in the world that, if that's not addressed, it may manifest itself in that behavior again, hurting themselves or hurting others. Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. When you say hurting themselves, and I think about hurting other people, and I think about media and what's big in the news right now, obviously, is with children who hurt other people via school shootings or acting out at home, and that violence coming through. And, there's a lot of sides. It's a very nuanced issue. We're not going to solve it right here. But one of the things that gets pushed out really fast is like, well, more mental health would solve this problem, right? You've got people who sort of attack the guns, and you've got people say, no, it's a mental health issue. More mental health would solve this issue. In your work with adolescents, do you agree with a blanket statement like more mental health would do it? Or is it better mental health, different systems of care? Like, what is some of the key factors that would be contributing to an answer to that problem, to answer to that question? Because it feels like every other week now, right? Like we're turning on the TV and it's like, what do we do? So from your professional opinion, what are some important things that we should be doing as a system, as a family, as individual providers? What are the answers as you see it?
Oh, Jason, you're asking me big questions here on this podcast.
I'm asking for an opinion. I'm not asking for like your research or like that. We're not saying Dr. Naidoo has all the answers and is like what she says. If we just do this, it's over. I just know that this has to be something that crosses your plate. It has to be something that's on your mind with the population you work with. And I just wonder if you have any theories as to how we got here and how we can get out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a huge topic, and I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in homicidal teens. That's not my wheelhouse, but
Fair enough.
I will say of the teens I've taken care of, so suicidal teens I deal with a lot. Many, like 95% of the patients I see have had suicidal thoughts or thinking or action. I think that there is a small percentage I've come across in my own work that have truly had homicidal ideation, intention, and plan, which is an executed plan to end their life. But if you truly have these feelings and thoughts, you're not going to share it with anyone. And that's the real tricky part. If you have a mental health care condition, and that's a factor in your decision making, you're not going to tell someone if you really want to do this thing. And I think that I think the general population may think that if someone has the thought to, let's say, kill somebody else, they have to have a mental illness. But there are other factors. I mean, that's why we have a legal system, a forensic system, because there are more complex ways of thinking that get people into a position to be so upset, angry, disappointed, frustrated, to try to end other people's life, to solve whatever problem they're trying to solve. I think that the fact that so many young people are turning to a violent way to express themselves speaks to how deep and how long-standing these issues have been going on for our young people. It speaks to the fact that so much is happening in school, speaks to how they see it as not just affecting them, but others, and speaks to how others' peer relationships are a factor in mental health as well. And I think that's what we see also from the Youth Behavioral Risk Survey by the CDC, which really aims to evaluate the juxtaposition of school and mental health, school and risk factors. So we know there's been a connection between school support and mental health for a long time. And all kids are required to go to school, right? So that's the way in for everybody. All kids are not required to come see me or you, right? So there's going to be a large population that never comes to see us. And I think that's been the case for a lot of the school shooting population, that they have not received mental health care or are ambivalent about continuing that care. I mean, just today, a patient today that I saw, we had to discontinue care because the young person would not come and see me. I can't help you if I don't see you. I have to evaluate you. And I can't go into your home. I mean, I'm in telehealth, so technically I am going into your home. But if you won't turn on the camera and talk to me, how can I engage you? So I think that it just speaks to an underlying suffering that we need to meet. And if the young people are suffering, if the children are suffering, their parents are suffering, their families are suffering, the system of care around them are suffering. And I think it is no shock that our mental health care system is not serving the needs of our youth and adults for many, many years, in part because enough money is not going into it. And when the money goes in, it's not going in to the places where it really needs to, because what we need to also do is not just have more mental health care professionals. We need to support the mental health care professionals already there. Part of the reason why I left outpatient care, I'm now in a different type of mental health care, is because I was burning out. I mean, I couldn't pee. I couldn't eat. I was had back to back patients. And when a crisis came on, if I had a patient come in with a crisis and I had 20 minutes, I have to keep finishing this patient up. I can't just say, okay, leave, you're suicidal, go away. You have homicidal, go. No, I have to finish it up. So that extends me into the next patient. And then I can't, then I'm behind. And then I have to do charting. And so I think for us as mental health care practitioners, we are also really having secondary, tertiary trauma from what we're hearing and the conditions that we're working in. So we need to sustain us as well, because if you're a patient who's dealing with homicidal, suicidal thoughts, and you come in Friday at 6 p.m. and you're my last patient of the day, it's going to be really hard for me to give you my all, because I've been doing this all week long, and it's not built into our system, unfortunately, in outpatient care to do the things we need to do to replenish our breaking system. But so I think it's just another symptom of how young people in our system are breaking. And when I see school shootings, my heart breaks, because this kid's heart is breaking. Yes, he did it in a violent way, or he or she did it in a violent way, but anger is not the first emotion. It is a second emotion. What happened before they got that angry and went to go take that gun? What was going on in their life that filled them with disappointment and pessimism and darkness and feeling they had no other out than to do this thing? You have to be backed into a pretty tight corner to get to that place. And I still believe it is horrible and a tragedy and unconscionable. I mean, I really don't, I can't wrap my head around how someone can get into that position to want to take the life of others. And I can still be compassionate, to be aware that our system is not doing what it can to help these young people. And our parents don't know what to do. And that's really where my mission for DoBetterMD comes from. I think that we need to equip the first responders to these young people who are suffering, which really are the parents. Parents are the first responders. They are the emotional firefighters coming in, trying to kind of douse whatever fire they see with whatever they can. And it's the pediatricians. Pediatricians are really bearing the brunt of mental health care as well, because they go to them before they get to us. Before they get to the therapist and the counselor, they come to us. And the schools, the schools really are also struggling. They are not trained or equipped to deal with the tsunami of mental health care needs that their students have. And their primary concern still has to be education and academics. But when you're depressed and anxious, you can't be educated. So it's really a catch-22. I think we have a hard we're between a rock and a hard place. And to fix this will take money and passion and persistence and an angle from all perspectives. It's not just get more psychiatrists, get more counselors. It's not just let's teach the parents what to do to keep their home safe when their kid's suicidal. It's not just let's get more beds in the psychiatric hospital. It's not just let's build more awareness in school settings and get more counselors in the school. It is all of that and more. And again, I didn't say this, but we know it is also social media, online activity, disconnection from peers, fear of missing out because they're now aware that Susie is hanging out with other girls and not them. Like there are all these other pressures that we did not go through. And I think we forget that young people are bombarded by this minute after minute after minute in a different way than it was before. And this is why 57% of teenage girls are depressed, and that's why the CDC survey is now showing with the most recent survey from 2021, which was the first data they had post-COVID, was that girls across the board are suffering. They are more depressed. They are having more suicidal thoughts. They're more often likely to have a suicide plan. We know they have always attempted more than boys. That's always been the case. But they're also, what I think is fascinating from that survey, they're using substances more than boys. I thought that was fascinating.
That's flipped. That wasn't always like that. That's flipped in the last 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's really, again, a demonstration of how do we manage our emotions? How do we get into a better state of mind? Oh, alcohol. Alcohol's there. Most homes have alcohol. Vape is there. Marijuana is there. All of that's there. So I think the increase in school shootings is just another symptom of a diseased universe that we're living in. We are all more stressed. We are all struggling, and our children are telling us we need to do something about it.
No, I love it. I love it. And I did put you on the spot. I mean, just in all fairness.
I tried. I tried my best.
No, you crushed it, of course, because you gave the perfect answer, which is that there's not one answer, right? Like that's what you're saying. There's not one answer. There may not be 10 answers because it's all factors involved in this system. And I love that you touch on the fact that, this idea that if they can just get to the psychiatrist, if they can just get to the therapist, that all is well. I got to tell you, through this work and in the last 20 years, I've met people like you so many times, and there are loving, caring, well-trained, really smart, passionate people at every agency. I mean, you really can't go somewhere that those factors are not present. But they're outmatched, they're overmatched, and they're outgunned, pardon the expression, given the topic, but they are really swamped, right? And burnout is at an all-time high. I mean, I've experienced it in the past. I mean, I don't know that I've met a therapist that hasn't gone through a period of burnout, right? And we're talking about your daily schedule doing this 30 to 35 times. And oh, by the way, we're going to mix in that homicidal kid or that suicidal kid. I hope you can catch it in 10 minutes,
Right,
I mean, it's really tough. And it's scary because it's easy to lay this at the feet of the pandemic and say, well, things exploded in the pandemic. We were outmatched before the pandemic. This system has been maxed for a long time. And I don't know what the answer is in terms of advocacy or forming a union or getting politicians to hear us, but the change, I think, has to come from the inside out. Folks like us who are on the front lines and are doing the work and saying, no, here's what the situation actually is. Even something as simple as creating a world where the companies that you run or the companies that hire you can afford to let you sit with a patient for 40 minutes each time. Something like that would be amazing. It would change so much. And I will tell you from my experience in growing businesses, when I go to a pediatrician's office, like the typical drug rep thing where like they're bringing in lunch and they're buying them gifts. These pediatricians are buying me lunch and they're bringing me gifts because they're like, your behavioral health, thank God. Thank God, please. I've got 100 names right here, because it's scary. They know what they're dealing with and they know that the stakes are very high and they want to do the right thing for their patients, but they're treating diseases and they're treating the flu and they're treating sicknesses, typical physical health symptoms. Oh, by the way, become an expert, become almost like a psychiatrist while you're at it, Scary position for those guys to be in,
Absolutely. And And they're stuck managing medications too that they don't typically manage. And they're stuck with interventions they don't typically deal with, mixed in with asthma and meningitis and the common cold. And I really feel for pediatricians, because I think that they're forced into a position to be a psychiatrist very often, and they're ill-equipped, and they have less time structure flexibility than me. If I go and say, hey, I have a suicidal kid in here, I have people come in and they know what to do because I'm behavioral health, but they don't always, and that one child, that one experience really can make it very challenging for everyone. And of course we all want to help, right? I'm not saying you are honest about your feelings and we help, but the system is really, really breaking. And I also wanted to say, I've had my share of patients too who don't say they have homicidal thoughts, but there is something about them that is frightening, worrisome, guarded. And I've had many times where I say to a supervisor or another attending like me, and I say, there's something about this kid, I don't know what it is, but he feels like a school shooter. What do we do? How do we keep this kid safe? And then it becomes this whole thing. Well, do you call the police? In New York, there's a way to say this person should not have a gun if you're a mental health care provider, but different states are different. I live in Arizona, right? And right now I work with kids in Florida, and different states have different rules. And we don't want to take away people's rights, but we want to make sure people are safe, not just our patients, but people around them. And I think that we still do not know exactly what to do with kids that fall into this category. So it's a different animal, a different kind of patient than a suicidal youth. We kind of know what to do with them, even though we don't have enough, we know what to do. But those youth who really have homicidal thoughts, feelings, aggressive tensions, it's really challenging. We are still figuring it out. And I think that's not reassuring, right, for the audience to hear. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that we still are evolving as a field. We don't know everything. We are not correct with everything. And there are absolutely special cases where we have to collaborate and work with an entire group to really sort out how to really help keep people safe. But the most important person on that team is the parent. The parent is the most important person on the team. We need to get parents of these kids on board to work with us and to persist, even if that young person is not ready.
Yeah.
One of my attendings would say, when I was in training, would say, that adage, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But she added, if you follow the horse long enough, it will get thirsty. Dr. Ostrovskaya, get thirsty. So we have to keep following that horse, you, me, and parents keep following.
So let's talk about that. It's actually a great segue into one thing I was thinking about, because you're on your end and recognizing the limitations of the system, being at time and reimbursement and just the challenging nature of the work and all the things that we've been talking about. But there is a necessary collaboration with us and the people that care about the people that you're seeing, right? Or us and the client. That collaboration, it's a relationship. And so recognizing the limitations of the system and what we're really dealing with, how can patients or people who care about these patients, what can they do on their end to kind of get the most out of the system as is? Okay, so it's not perfect. There are limitations. We recognize it. So we can kind of sit in that and go, well, we don't have a perfect system, so why try? That's not an option. We're going to try. We're going to get this figured out. So what can they do to get the most out of their time with you? What can they do to prep for sessions? Like, what can they do to navigate the system and just get, I guess, the best chance at the best outcome? Like, what is their part in this equation that they can control and that will help this process, even as it's constructed now?
So I think no matter whether you're a parent or you're a patient, no matter what age you are, I think it's really important to have some self-reflection about what you want out of that 15-minute visit. I think becoming a self-advocate and recognizing that you have to be your own voice. And if that means it's hard to speak in person because you have social anxiety, record yourself, text yourself, do a video of yourself, but be ready and be prepared. So I say, the night before, brainstorm the top 10 points you want to get across to the psychiatrist when you see them. And I say, ask yourself things like, do I think my medications are helping me? Do I not? And it's okay if you think they're not, but just be real with yourself about whether you think it's made a difference or not. Be prepared to ask yourself, how much better am I or worse am I since being on this medication? Are there side effects? if I think nothing is better myself, has anyone else told me it's better? Does my girlfriend think it's better? Does my mother think it's better? And also, think about what percentage has improved. Because as a psychiatrist, if we have 15 minutes, we are talking and listening in symptoms. So we're listening for particular words like my anxiety is, my depression is, my symptoms of mood lability are. And that just helps us kind of clue in. Most people don't talk like that though, right? Most people are telling the narrative of their life, which we of course want to hear. And if there's a real issue that you're having, we also need to be able to hone into that. Because as a psychiatrist, as a therapist as well, right? Another thing that I think patients may not realize is that part of our training is how to listen. We have to listen to a narrative, a situation, and we have to pull apart those symptoms. And then while we're doing that, we have to listen to our own internal narrative, responding to your narrative, and pull apart our pearls of wisdom that we want to give you. So there's really 4 or 5 levels of listening that we have to go through every time we listen to a patient, and then figure out what has to come out of our mouth, right? Because we can't exactly say everything out of our mouth, but we have to make sure what we say is now going to be received by the person that's there. And when do we interrupt or intervene in their narrative telling? So I think as a patient or a parent, recognizing how can I word this so that the doctor does hear me in a succinct way. I would also always recommend bringing your meds, bringing your vitamins. If you are taking something every single day, I know the words, the language, the writing, it's kind of hard to say, right? Fluoxetine, venlafaxine, these are hard things to say. So just bring in the bottle. Let me look at the bottle myself so I know exactly what you're taking. If you got it from your primary care doctor, I mean, sometimes people will get different meds from different people and they're treating the same thing. Bring it all in so we can look at it together so we're really on the same page, because we need to get on the same page to move you forward. I also want my patients to be honest, right? Like I've had several visits where I take the whole 15 minutes, 40 minutes, and they don't tell me they stopped their medication. They don't tell me that they forgot it for a couple of days. Like, just be honest. I'm not going to be mad. Everyone does what they want to do. I think 100% of people have some aspect of non-adherence or not taking their meds at some point in their life, including me and my vitamins and my medication. I don't remember it all the time. So, but being honest about whether you're using or not using your medication as prescribed, whether or not you're using alcohol or weed or CBD to go to bed, that would be helpful. Nicotine, vape, all of that can affect your level of the medication in your system. And kind of just be upfront with us so that we can just move forward, and I have other tips about when to make your appointments, but I feel like I'm rambling. So if you want me to keep going, I can. But
no, I think it's great. I do want to jump in a little bit though, because I loved your description of us listening, and I know like you're listening for different things than I am, but that active listening state is so complex, and I think that's where I think clarity of communication from the patient is, and repeat. If you think we're not getting it, repeat and let us know, right? Like you're the expert. We're learning you, right? And so there's a great scene with the Zach Galifianakis movie where he's playing this really dumb guy and he's at the table like gambling and all these equations are like around his head. I don't know if you've seen that, but that really is what it's like to sit in this chair, because it's like, okay, I'm recognizing that, I'm connecting it to the previous session, I'm looking for patterns. Is that important? Oh, by the way, you've kept talking, so now I'm going to catch up. What is the theme that's developing here? Oh, wait, I've got some preliminary diagnosis that's coming up in the background. Do I want to present that yet, or do I want to listen a little bit longer? The probing, all the time, while we have to be very empathic and warm and and let it go. And so I think it's great to acknowledge that there's a lot going on over here. So the more noise you can make around the things that are really important to you, and the more clarity you can bring, I think helps us so much. And if it helps us, guess what? It's going to help you. So I'm interested to hear more though. If you have more tips and more like recommendations, I think we need to get those out there, because it's like, here's your link to your telehealth session. See you at 3. What do I do with that? So what else are you thinking about?
Well, I want to also make another point about the process, which I think is interesting, is maintaining our poker face. That's another thing that takes a lot of energy. Like 10 years of training, I'm still working on my poker face, because you're reacting to what is being heard and what you're thinking, and then what you're hearing, and then what you're thinking and response. It's just, and then still presenting, I am listening. I'm here with you. I'm here with you, even though my mind is all over the place, but I'm still here with you. So that is why I think sometimes patients might think that we're not listening because we have this poker face. So I think that the other points I want to bring up was about how to position yourself to get my attention. How do you position yourself to get the most out of me in a day when you have only 15 minutes with me? Because if I've been doing that process all day long and you're my last appointment, it's really hard, because I'm carrying the residue of the whole day with me by the time I get to you. So if you can book an appointment with me the first 25% of the day, first thing in the morning, and I say the first 25% because as I get closer to lunch, things start to pile up. So first 25% right before lunch, because if I run over, I have a buffer of time versus have to go to the next patient right after lunch. Those are the times I think would be best. And I think the absolute worst appointment of the day is actually not the last appointment. It's the second to last appointment because I am so anxious to get to the last appointment because I have nobody else after. So the last person does get more of me because I have a buffer. Like there's no one else behind them. So if I go over, oh well. But the second to last person, I know my last person's waiting for me right now. I see them pop up on my screen. So I'm kind of pushing you forward. So try to avoid that one. I also say, if you have a topic you really want to talk to me about, put a point in my ear, ping me earlier. Get to talk to my medical staff, my medical assistant, my nurse. Send me a message a day or two before and say, hey, this is something I really want to talk about with you, Dr. Naidoo. And you can do that via your patient portal. You can do it by calling the office and letting me know. So that way, if you've done it that a day or two before, it's going to be in my mind. So when I see you pop up on my screen, I'm going to remember, oh yeah, she had this topic she wanted to talk about. So I'm going to make sure I bring it up if she doesn't. So I think that's really helpful and that's free, right? You don't need to pay for that. And then also, as I talked about before, speaking in symptoms, if we've talked about before, you and I, and we've had an established relationship and we've identified, we're working on your anxiety. We're working on your depressive symptoms. We're working on your anger management. Then when you speak to me, you talk to me in that way. But if you feel like I'm in the session with you or the doctor's with you and they are still totally checked out and typing, because remember, I forgot to tell you, I'm typing my note, right, as I'm talking to you. So as I'm talking to you, I'm typing along because I don't have any time to document. So you may think when I'm looking up and down at the screen or you on the side, I'm not paying attention, but I'm doing all these things and typing my note. So I would say, as you've said, Jason, repeat 3 times, make sure I got it. And I would say, if you feel like I'm not following you, just to be clear, Dr. Naidoo, I'm experiencing blah, 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 just to make sure that we're on the same page. And I said, just to be clear, Dr. Naidoo, for a reason, because I can't tell you, Jason, people don't know who I am.
Right,
I see them
right.
for years. They don't know my name. Like, come on, guys. I know your name. Know my name. So if you're sitting in the office with me and you think I'm not listening, call me by my name. Say, hey, Dr. Naidoo, this is the symptom, da 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 da. And I will automatically be pulled to my name because you called me, right? You are seeing me, right? And the other thing that I think would be awesome, and I'm not saying this just because I'm trying to get accolades, but I think appreciation goes a long way. So if you feel like I'm not listening to you and you say, Dr. Naidoo, I really appreciate how well you listen to me, and then go in, you're going to call me right to you, right? I'm going to listen to the people that I like, that I care about, that appreciate me, that value me. I'm going to stop typing and listen to you. So those are some things I think could really help draw attention back to you, as well as asking questions, saying things like, I don't know, I'm not really sure. That really makes it hard. Like, I can't really say, I'm not, I don't really know. Like those kinds of answers are really hard for us to handle because we really want to be productive and helpful. So ask a question. Instead of saying, I don't know, you can say, what do you think could be causing this symptom? Right? Do you think it could be this? And that will help me kind of draw my attention back to you and deliver to you. And I think for teens, I think it's, again, we're so busy and a lot of people may not do this, but I really try to talk to the teenager alone. So if your provider is not talking to you alone and they're seeing you and the parent together, ask as the teenager or the parent, can you please talk to my child alone? Can you please give me 2 minutes by myself? Because you're going to get so much more from that teen by themselves than you ever will with the parent sitting next to them. So get them by themselves. I would also educate that teenager to really think about what they want, because what the parent may want may not be what they want. The parent may want them to clean their room, but the kid may want to stop cutting. So we identify what that youth wants and really focused in on what they want by listening to them. And we remind them to speak up, and that no matter what your parent says and how much they may take up of the visit, because that happens very often, we want that teenager's voice, opinion, experience to come up, because it's valid, and that's what we're really treating. We're treating the kid. And I also tell youth, even if you think it's a bizarre question out of left field, ask me. Ask me. I've had young people ask me random questions, but it helps me remember them and helps give me a sense of who they are with what they ask you, even if it's not related to mental health. I mean, I'm a doctor. You don't get to see people like me. Like, ask me about the pain in your leg. Ask me about your headache. Ask me about, whether you think your boyfriend still likes you. Like, I want to know those questions because that gives me insight on where your priorities are. So those are the tips that I have. Really be prepared, try to get my attention, be honest and upfront. And if you can, bring your bottles of medication and vitamins and whatever else you're taking. So I know kind of what's kind of in the mix, literally and figuratively. And ask to talk to me alone. And this is the same if you are coming with a spouse. I have oftentimes had, men come in with their wives, and their wives kind of take up the visit. And really, I'm treating the husband. So talk to that person alone. Even if there is a co-collaborator in the mix, we want to make sure that we have that protected, safe, sacred space to really treat the person that we need to treat.
Well, I love what I love about your tips so much, and these are great. Like, I want to make lists, and you should itemize this, get it out on your social. Like, these are so helpful. I want to put it in my informed consent packets for so there's hey, just some tip, really. I mean, because that's part of the process. But what you're talking about there is developing a relationship, right? And they may be going to a session, but when it comes to behavioral health, this is typically a long-term thing. It's not a broken bone. We can't put a cast on it, see you in 8 weeks, look sound, take an x-ray, okay, cast is off, see you never. This is something that is going to evolve over time. And what you need from your behavioral health provider is going to change from 16 to 20 to 24, and it's nobody's goal to have you in care forever, but there is a developing relationship there. And I love that because there's this concept that's called concerted cultivation, where in high functioning, sort of educated families, and there's lines, that's how they raise their kids. They raise their kids to be active participants in the world around them, right? To be self-advocates, as you would say. And so they rehearse, we're going to go to the doctor today. And it's not you sit up straight and you be quiet and you don't make the doctor mad. It's, what do you want them to know? What are you going to ask them? What are 3 things that you think that they definitely need to know today? One of my favorite questions in session is, what am I not asking you that I should? Right? If we hit a lull, and I always like to put it near the end of the session with about 15 minutes to go, because it's so easy as humans to fall into what I think the path is. And like you said, I'm talking about, I can hit them with all kinds of organizational techniques. And like you said, they're talking about cutting, right? What have I not asked you that I should? And it gives them an opportunity to take the steering wheel for a while. So I love that all of your tips are kind of feeding that sense of concerted cultivation. This is your time. I'm here to assist. What's important to you? What's your desired outcome? And how can you clue me into that so that I can help you achieve that outcome more often than not, or be your best advocate or your best helper to get there? So I love that. I really, how long have you been a psychiatrist? I mean, over 10 years now, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I finished my adult training in 2013 and my child training in 2015.
Gotcha. And so is this approach, is this innate to you? Is this just the kind of human that you are, that you want this collaboration, or did that develop as part of your practice over time? Because I'm just curious, because I think it's wonderful.
I mean, it should be a part. I mean, it's informed consent, right? Well, that's what we're educated on. But I think that honestly, my mom helped me understand that being able to make your own choice and your own decision is a powerful tool. So I think that's part of who I am. I want to cultivate my relationship with patients to feel like they are empowered to make their own choice. And that's why you always have, at least with medications, again, this is simplistic, but with medications, you always have 3 options. You keep it the way it is, you go up, you go down, you go off. That's 4 options right there. That feels so different to say these are your 4 options with one medication than go up on it. go down on it. Like, this is what you do. No, like, and if you're part of the process of making those decisions, you own the consequence of those decisions. And that's really important too, because we do create our lives. The things we think, the things we say, that creates the life that we have. And I don't ever want to make a patient, especially a young patient, a child or an adolescent, feel like I'm forcing them down a road they don't want to go. I want them to feel like they are walking their path by their own choice, and that I'm going to walk with you along the way for this part of the journey. And then I have to teach you to be brave enough to walk on your own, because I'm not going to be there forever. And our parents are not going to be there forever too. So I think that is kind of a part of who I am, but I think it's also a part of training. But I think, again, when you have so many patients, this takes time. This process takes time. So that's also why I'm more stressed than I guess other doctors would be, because I will take an extra 5 minutes and push everything down the line to have that discussion versus just kick you out the door. So
your passion for this is so clear. It's just obvious that you love it, and that you want to be good at it and you want to help people. This is a whole, it's like, this is like the first question of the podcast, but, we're getting near the end. I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, though that passion, those talents, like, why psychiatry? Like, what drew you to that as the place to practice and the place to, like, demonstrate that passion?
Oh man. Well, I think I have always wanted to be a witness to stories. I wanted to bear witness to people suffering. I wanted to help someone through suffering. I actually, today is my dad's birthday. My dad died of leukemia several years ago, over 25 years ago. And the experience I saw of him with oncologists, with neurologists, really made me so upset, which is what made me go to med school, because I didn't want to be those doctors that didn't really care or give a damn, to be frank. And I wanted to do palliative care, end of life care, because I wanted to be able to help someone transition to the next stage. And then I was drawn to psychiatry because I felt there was no other field where the listening was so powerful and so important. And the how was more important than the what. So I think that drew me to it. And, child, really, I had many experiences in my adult training and as a medical student where I would work with these kids as a medical student and feel like, how did this kid become this way? I want to understand, like, because I'm a parent. I have 2 boys and I know I'm going to mess up. I've messed up already. On my podcast, I have episodes called Fix It Friday, because I know I mess up and I want to fix it. So I think that part of me being drawn to mental health was recognizing, if your mind is not stable and strong, nothing else can be that way. So we have to start with our mind, and it's more than your brain. It is your spirit, it's your soul, it's your sense of self. And it just takes one person to plant one little seed, and that can just grow into this huge tree of confidence and hope and resilience. And we are those agents of change. We are those, we're planting these seeds every day. And you don't need to be a psychiatrist to do that. Anyone can do that. So I think that I just wanted to learn how to cultivate that. So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, no, that's really good. It's very much a be the change you want to see in the world, perspective that drew you in. And you're right on. I don't have the study. I'll put it in the show notes. But there was this talk about basically kids who had been rehabilitated, who had gotten involved in, some type of disciplinary trouble, legal trouble, things like that early on, and which ones went on to achieve a college degree, which ones went on to achieve some success. And it was the common factor was the one non-familial caring adult. So the coach, the therapist, that's right, the environmental support. Parents are the most important, but there's something to that adult who takes an interest and is there to help and care, So that's amazing. With the time we have left, I did want to carve out a little bit of time and talk a little bit more about DoBetterMD. I know that that's a passion of yours as well. And I assume it's a little bit different than your day-to-day day in and out diagnostic work. So tell me about the origins of that and what you're hoping to accomplish there.
Yeah, so DoBetterMD is the organization that I've founded, and it's evolving. So my goal with that really is to provide education to parents about how they can empower themselves to prevent youth suicide. So I want to be able to promote mental wellness and prevent mental crisis in youth. And for me, that's suicide prevention. So I am creating workshops and courses for parents to take so that they, on their own time, because, they're busy, can just go on, do a little course. How do I talk to my kid about suicide? How do I keep my home safe? How do I listen to my child when they're really getting me angry? So I have courses like this that I'm working on so that parents can take them and be empowered to really help their child get through these tough times. And I'm also working to help support pediatricians, doing group consultations and individual consultations for pediatricians who are dealing with this behavioral crisis on the front line. And it's very different to deal with a kid that has asthma, than has suicidal thinking or anger and aggression. So my goal is to provide one-on-one consultations and group consultations to really help them, because they didn't do a child psychiatry fellowship, but I did, right? So if I'm trying to be an agent of change and do the greatest good, I think really empowering pediatricians to be able to handle these kids while they're waiting to get into a doctor like me would go a really far way. So those are the two branches I have right now. I'm working on creating more extensive courses on parent empowerment and parent-child connection, because really I think parent-child connection and investment in our kids on a personal, one-on-one way really is going to prevent the escalation of this mental crisis further, which is beyond suicide, which is resilience and growth and self-confidence and being able to solve the world's problems, because we have a lot of them. We need our younger people to kind of figure it out, and their belief in themselves comes from our belief in them. So we need to really help foster that. And parents are very busy. We live in a different world. We are very distracted, and teens don't make it easy. Right? They don't make it easy for us to connect with them. So I think that giving space to provide tools to do that in a concrete, bite-sized, actionable way is really my way of doing better. I want to do better as a doctor. I want people to do better. I want you to know better so that you can do better, and then ultimately to feel better.
I love the continued evolution that's implied in there, right? Like just do a little bit better tomorrow and then a little bit better the day after that, right? We're never a finished product. We're always evolving and trying to take that next step. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that the more we can equip and strengthen families in whatever form they take. I'm not getting into a conversation about nuclear families versus traditional families versus whatever, but whatever that family unit is, the more we can equip them and strengthen them and connect them, the better it's going to be for the child. And that's something that every family wants. I mean, there's no debate on that. So,
and the parent, and the parent too. I think sometimes we feel like we give to the kids, but when we have that one-on-one time with our kid and they say, "Mom, you're awesome," or you can see in their face that it resonated, that feeds us. And we as parents need to be fed too. We need love also, right? So it goes both ways. Not just giving to the kid, but also gives back to us and reminds us, wow, we do a really tough job every single day, but it's rewarding for those 5 minutes. And that's what makes it worth it.
That's what I tell parents, and that's what I experienced myself. I have 2 children as well, and my wife and I will talk about this. It made everything harder, but it made everything better, right? Like those things go hand in hand. And so, listen, I wish we had unlimited time, but I want to be respectful of your time. But thank you. We have to do this again. You clearly have so much to share and so much to give, and I just appreciated this time so much. Thank you so much for coming by today. This was great.
Oh, thank you for having me. Anytime.
Definitely. We'll list everything, but you want to give people tips on how to find you? Like, how do people connect with you?
Yeah. So my website, DoBetterMD, DoBetterMD.com. You can find information about me there. My podcast is on there. You can also email me at DoBetterMD@gmail.com. And at my Instagram, I think is Dr. Shivana Naidoo, and I have a Facebook page, professional and personal. So you can find me all there.
I mean, just all this free time you have, you've got all these these extra things that you're putting out there. But thank you for that. Like I said, I've gone through your content and I'm excited to see what comes next. I mean, you're definitely contributing and making a difference. So thank you so much. And then I do want to take a moment before we part and give a shout out to our sponsors. I mean, Anew Behavioral Health. When we talk about that, if you're in Ohio and you're in New Hampshire, Anew Behavioral Health, I mean, that's the place where if you've been inspired by any of this, if you want to, think of ways to do better, or you just have a sense that life could could be better. I mean, Dr. Naidoo has been talking about prevention and talking about dealing with this crisis before it happens. So if you're in Arizona, she can help you with that. But if you're in Ohio or you're in New Hampshire, Anew can be there for you. They have psychiatrists, they have a medical staff in terms of nursing, nurse practitioners, they have therapists, of course, they have case managers, and they can help folks dealing with the mental health issues or the addiction issues in an integrated fashion. So if you already have providers in place and you need to add to that, if you've talked to your doctor and there's still issues to deal with, please reach out to them. You can always find them at anewbh.com, so newbh.com. Or if you just want to reach out and get some questions answered, there's no obligation to that. It's always easy to do. They have a helpline, help now at anewbh.com. They'll be happy to get involved and get you the answers that you need. So, everybody involved in this, Dr. Naidoo, Leo, part of the production team. I mean, Ian wasn't here. Producer Ian wasn't here. And I didn't notice, Leo. Did you notice his absence? I think we did pretty good. We're okay without his supervision. So that's good. But for you listening and watching at home, your most valuable resource is your time. So if you spent this time with us, we appreciate you so much. And I hope that was time well spent. So that's it for this episode. We'll wrap it up. Thank you again, Dr. Naidoo. And thanks to you at home. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.